Smith up. Amen. And who had the privilege of praying? Okay, Greg, come on up, please, and we'll begin the morning. Give it up for Greg. Woo!
Cool. Yeah, Father, we just thank you for Mark, Lord. We thank you for this week, Lord. We just thank you for just the wisdom that he carries and just what you want to do in our hearts, Father. And we just thank you for not only the content that he's bringing, Lord, but just the message behind it, Lord, and just that, Lord, we just pray that we would just be able to dream big this week in this class, Father, that we would really be able to see what you are doing in the lives of the people during this time, Lord. And we pray, Lord, that we just be able to apply it to our own lives today, God. So we just thank you for this week in Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, so we pick up where we left off last time. So you can see we've covered one. We sort of started to cover two, and then we'll go faster today. We'll get through four and maybe push into five a bit. So that's kind of where we are. Got to keep track of the syllabus, you know. But things will speed up a little bit later. Okay, so back now to archaeology. Oh, it's going to do this funny thing again. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we talked about the making of a tell. We built several cities and knocked them down. We learned a couple of rules of history. We looked at the ways that archaeologists approach a tell. We looked at a few archaeologists hard at work, getting nice and dirty, and not so much. And now we want to talk about how do we analyze what we find in archaeology? One thing we've already talked about is stratification. What is that? Stratification? The layers, right? Analyzing the layers relative to each other. And you have a relative chronology here. You know where the older stuff is, you know where the newer stuff is, you know kind of how they're related to each other. And remember that these archaeological sites are not isolated. There are hundreds of them in Israel. So it's not just that I'm analyzing this one, I'm always analyzing this one in comparison with all the other ones. So that Stratum 4 here may be having the same kind of finds as Stratum 7 somewhere else. And so there's constant cross-checking and keeping of records and publishing the finds and that sort of stuff. So there's lots of ways that you can refine these methods over time. And of course, scholars have been working on it now for a couple hundred years. We talked a little bit about typology. Now you can do typology with anything. In fact, anybody watch movies? Yes. Okay, if you watch a movie, you're always doing typology, you just don't know it. Because right away you look at it and you say, boy, people dressed funny in the 1970s, right? What age is that car? You know, when did they give up on those hairdos, right? Why are those strange colors in the home? And you know these things automatically, and automatically when you see it and you see people driving around a certain car. I used to be a mechanic, and I used to pay attention to cars, and I could tell you, any car on the road, I could tell you what make and model it was and what year. That was a long time ago. I can't do that anymore. But they all kind of look the same now. But that's something that you can do when you get used to it. That's the typology of automobiles. That is, they follow a pattern that you can recognize, and once you get into it, and you get paying careful attention to the shapes of automobiles, you know how to tell a 56 Chevy from a 57 Chevy. Anybody know? Fins? Yeah, 57 has the sharp fins and 56 has the rounded ones. It's just, you know, little things like that you notice because you just pay attention. Otherwise, they're identical, pretty much. But those are the kinds of things that you pay attention to. In Hawaii, you can do it with fish hooks. But one thing that any place that has pottery is the easiest thing to do it with. You can also do it with other things, so you can do it with artwork. You can do it with beads, you know, that you find. You can do it with architecture. Certain kinds of buildings are made at different periods of time. So there's lots of ways to do typology, but the common one for Israel is to do pottery typology, simply because pottery is everywhere. Because they made pottery because it's fired, it lasts. And when people break it, if you live in a world that's full of rocks and dirt, including the floor of your home, if you drop a pot, just leave it. It's just going to fill, right? So it's not like they try to clean it up or something. So you've got broken pottery everywhere, and so we're finding it all the time, and so we can do analysis of this sort. And this has been done every day when we're doing excavation at Bethsaida, where I work. Every afternoon we spend an hour and a half doing pottery reading, and you've got to do it every day, analyzing the pottery and keeping careful records and putting them in the computer. And this is every day for 27 years. Okay, so and every day for 2 months out of the summer. Every day for 27. But still, it's a lot. And we're talking about every day we may be reading a couple hundred pieces of pottery. So when you get there, when you get used to it, you're sitting there and pretty much the pottery expert will be doing his pottery reading, and within a week, you're saying, oh, I know what that's a Galilean bowl. I recognize, oh, that's that triple tier cooking pot. I know what that is. You know, and you just, you know, you develop the skills just by watching the shapes pretty quickly, just like you would anything else. So that's pottery typology. So the combination now, a type of pottery fits in a certain stratum on the tell, and you cross-check these with hundreds of other pieces of pottery and hundreds of other tells, and the result is a pretty darn good database for developing a pottery chronology, so that you find a particular type of pottery and you can get, within reason, a decent date for it. So this is just a sense of the typology method. Now here's a picture of stratigraphy at work. What you are seeing here is at Bethsaida. This is one of my students discovered this place. This is a street. This is actually the city gate. We're going to talk today about city gates. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I got two. This is good. All right. I'm going to be talking really fast by the time I get through those. Okay. So, hey, Travis, come on. You people speak Korean. Come on. You can talk. You've been talking like that all the time. What are you talking about? So. I haven't even had the caffeine yet. So this is a street down here, paved street of stones. And then what you're seeing is stratigraphy here. So this is 1 meter. And down here at the bottom, see that dark gray stuff? Almost black? Okay, so that's a burn layer. We talked about burn layers before. That's a burn layer. Something got destroyed there. Then on top of it, you see this reddy, crumbly stuff up to about there. See red, crumbly stuff? That was a wall made of mud bricks that collapsed. So it's red, crumbly like bricks. Then above that, you get gray, rocky stuff, right about there. And then above that, you get gray, less rocky stuff. You're looking at 4 different strata here, okay? So that just gives you an idea when you look at stratigraphy. And of course, what we'd be analyzing in terms of typology is what did we find in this burn layer? What did we find in this crumbly red layer? What did we find in this rocky gray layer, etc.? Okay, now we're going to talk about dating. I'm going to teach you people how to date, because I know you don't do it very well. All right. Oh, that's bad. I know. But okay, so we can do relative dating. This doesn't mean date your relatives. What this means is this is degenerating really quickly. I got to stop this. Okay. So, I can't get dating relatives out of my mind. What I mean is what we did here, right? Older stuff at the bottom, younger stuff at the top. So we're talking about intergenerational dating here. This is very important. Relative dating we've got. The question is, how do we get absolute dating? That is, how do we put a year to it so that we can have some sense of when did this particular stratum get laid down? And then, of course, we want to be able to fit that with dates for written texts and dates for rules of kings and all that stuff. We can fit it together if we can try to figure out, okay, stratum 2 here, when was that? Can I get a date for that? And remember, these aren't just necessarily following on top of one another. Where I work at Bethsaida, we have 5 strata, but after stratum 4, the site is abandoned for about 300 years, and then re-inhabited, and then they start up again in sequence. So you get that big gap, and that can happen. So you got to get a way to do absolute dating. So one way to do is with pottery, as I told you. So you can do pottery typology, and because this has been studied very, very carefully, I can say this. From about the time of Jesus, so something about 2,000 years ago, with pottery dating, usually, it depends, but usually you can get a date within about, let's say, 50 to 100 years. Okay, so that's not bad. That your accuracy is about that level. Every once in a while it'll get better. I'll show you and explain. But and basically the rule is, another rule of history, the farther back you go, the farther off you are. Okay, history is a humble profession. Let's just fess up to it. By the way, these dates, I told you, this is the best I've seen as far as somebody putting it together and really thinking through the implications. These aren't precise. None of these are precise. But within about 20, 30 years, they're pretty good. So you'll see disagreements among different people within 20, 30 years. And there's flex points in here, like co-regencies. You have one king reigning and a son part of the time reigning with him, so the dates overlap. And you get some stuff like that. You get the connection between what's going on, say, King Ahab and the Battle of Karkar, and what we know about Assyrian king dating, and you connect those up, and there's a couple of years in there that we're not quite sure how it fits. That's just what we deal with in ancient history. I'm an ancient historian. Ancient history is always something like, you ever do puzzles? All right, think a 1,000-piece puzzle. You've got 100 pieces. That's what ancient history is. For the most part, we're doing a 1,000-piece puzzle and 900 of the pieces are missing. So we're trying to do the best job we can with the 100 pieces we got. So that means that history is never dead, right? You can lay them on. I think they make sense like this. That accounts for this, that accounts for this. They all fit together in this way, and then somebody says, yeah, but turn the puzzle this way. Oh, hadn't thought of it. Okay, now I got to move them around it, right? Oh, I found a new piece. Oh, now that makes me change these other pieces. Right? So when we talk about dates, when we talk about doing, let's just be humble about it. We're not going to be precise. Very, very seldom. Every once in a while I'll tell you, ooh, we got really good evidence right here. But not very often. Usually it's pretty bad evidence, and we do the best we can. Okay? So please recognize that there's some flex possible within these dates, and it's not the end of the world if you look at two people's dates and say, oh, this one's 20 years off. What can I do with that? The Bible must be wrong. No, just that's the 1,000-piece puzzle thing. You know, you're just looking at a piece from a different angle now, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, so one of the keys here is our ability to date particular strata, particular finds. How accurate can we be? I already told you now with pottery dating that around the time of Jesus, maybe within 50 to 100 years, that's pretty good. You get back to King David time, and it's more like 100 to 200 years. You go back farther, and the error rate is bigger, okay? So the margin for error keeps increasing as you go back, simply because you got fewer and fewer pieces of the puzzle. Okay? Now, it's not linear like that. Every once in a while, at an earlier period, we have a time of really rich evidence. Say the time of King Ahab, for example. We have really good evidence around the time of King Ahab. Before, not so great. After, not so great. But right there, it's pretty good. So it's not linear, but it does vary a little bit. But the standard rule, the farther back we go, the farther off we are. That's pretty good. And by the way, everything in this course, including when you get to the New Testament, is a long time ago, right? Okay. Now, another way you can get a date is carbon-14 dating. And there's similar methods like this. There's oxygen-20, there's DNA racemization. There's a number of scientific dating methods that you can use primarily on things that have been alive. Okay, now, well, oxygen-20 is on rocks, so they haven't been alive. But other stuff like pollen or plant matter or charcoal or bones or anything like that, you can use carbon-14 dating. So what's carbon-14 dating? And a lot of people say a lot of silly things about it, so let's be real honest with the evidence. Carbon-14 is a radioactive isotope of carbon that basically living beings ingest as being part of an ecosystem. Okay? So you're sucking up radioactivity all the time in the form of carbon-14. And it goes into your body and it kind of hangs out there. Now you are, by definition, a carbon-based unit. Okay? You are primarily carbon. You may not know this, but you are. You and sugar have a lot in common. You're primarily carbon. Okay? That's carbon-12. This means you're sweet. That's carbon-12. Carbon-14 is the radioactive version. Okay? So all of you who are alive right now have a certain proportion of carbon-12, which is most of you, and a little bit of carbon-14, which is radioactive. Okay? And there's a ratio between those two that is characteristic of all living things. Now you die. When you die, the carbon-12 stays the same because it's inert. But the carbon-14 is going to start to decay, as all radioactive things do. You're not taking it in anymore. So in your bones, or in the charcoal left over from a fire or something like that, you have this ratio of carbon-14 and carbon-12, and the carbon-14 is going down all the time and the carbon-12 is staying the same. So what you can do is measure that ratio. So you can take a sample of charcoal, you can take a bone or whatever, and so long as you have enough, and so long as you have good enough equipment, and so long as you have a good sample, you can measure in a lab the relationship between the carbon-12 and the carbon-14, which should tell you how far has the carbon-14 degenerated or decayed since you died. Carbon-14 has a known radioactive half-life. That means you can calculate how rapidly it decays. And theoretically, by measuring that ratio, you ought to be able to tell when the critter died. Okay? Yeah?
Does that ratio change depending on environment?
Yes. And that's part of the problem. I mean, this is ideal world in a lab. If you do any science, you know a lot of what scientists talk about is ideal things that happen in a lab that don't actually happen in the real world, but something sort of like them happens in the real world with other variables. So his question is really good. What's your name? Krister. Question is really good because there are things that either change your ability to measure the ratio or they change the rate of decay itself. So exposure to sunlight, temperature, soil chemistry. If it's buried, then it's not exposed to sunlight, but if it's on the surface, then it is exposed to sunlight. All these things can affect either your ability to measure or the rate of decay that you can measure, and thus kind of mess up your date. So the thing is, we know this, so what you do is you never take one carbon-14 date. You take multiple carbon-14 dates, and you take some that were on the surface and some that were underground, and you compare them to other sites and other finds, and you compare them to bones being found in a site along with pottery. You can date the pottery, you can do a double check on the bones, right? There's a lot of ways to measure these things relative to each other. For this reason, carbon-14 dating is pretty good. It's really good in more modern stuff. So Hawaiian archaeology, they do carbon-14 dating all the time. So for example, one of the great questions in Hawaiian archaeology is, when did humans first find these islands? That's a great question. We have an answer. The answer is provided only by carbon-14. So go south, down to South Point. Ever gone down to South Point? See the green sand beach down there? Yeah. Okay, right down by there's some sand dunes. In the sand dunes, some humans ate shellfish, and they threw away the shells. The shells were trapped in the sand dunes. We call this a shell midden. So they killed the critter. The critter has carbon-14. You can measure it by carbon-14 dating. And the carbon-14 date we get, and this is the oldest site in all of Hawaii, the carbon-14 date came back about 400 AD. Okay, so right now, that is our best evidence for when humans first arrived in Hawaii. That is the oldest date we've had anywhere. And there's quite a few cross-checks you can do because there's lots of shells in there that they can do in these things. And there's another Bellows Marine Base, Bellows Air Force Base on Oahu. Similar thing, and they're just from a little bit later. So that's it. That's the best we can do. What's our margin for error? Our margin for error at a 400 AD is give or take about 100 years. But that's the best we can do. That's great. Okay, give or take, somewhere between 3 and 500. the first humans came to Hawaii. That's great. For the most part, though, we'd like to be more accurate than that. And by the way, with carbon-14, absolutely, the farther back you go, the farther off you are. So the margin for error at 400 AD is give or take about 100 years. The time of Jesus is give or take about 150 years. The time of King David, say, is give or take a couple hundred years. And you keep going back, and pretty soon your margin for error approaches your ability to measure it. And therefore your margin for error becomes 100%, and then it means nothing. Right? So carbon-14 is useful back to about 1,000, maybe 2,000 BC, and beyond that, it starts to get, the margin for error gets so large that you got to just really be, I mean, sometimes it's the best you can do. You do what you can do, but you want to be careful because that margin for error keeps growing. Yeah?
Is that why they say like dinosaurs, they date like 65 million years? Like, is it like 100% bogus, like that date, because it's so...
No, it's not. But you have to use, with dinosaurs, you have to use different methods. You can't, carbon-14, it's so far down on its margin for error that it's not very useful. In fact, I think that's beyond the range of the half-life of carbon-14. And I think the half-life of carbon-14 is like 16,000, something like that. So it's not, I'd have to look that up to be sure. I can't remember what it is, but no, you have to use different methods with dinosaurs. And there are other methods, but the thing is the other methods are less reliable than carbon-14 to some degree. But like, for example, when you want to get a date of a rock, you use potassium-argon dating. So potassium converts into argon. And so again, you can measure the potassium-argon, and it does it much more slowly. So for really, really old dates, you can do potassium-argon dating. It's one of the best methods we have. Its margin for error is really huge, but you're talking about really huge dates, so you do what you can, right? With dinosaurs, it's even more complex than that. Just, you know, you always want to ask, whenever you're talking about one of these scientific dating methods, okay, at this period, with all the samples that you have, what's the margin for error that you think you're working with here? And you'll get a sense of it. And there'll be some argument about it, but the argument's kind of around the edges. There's pretty much agreement on what the margin for error is. There was another question?
Who came up with, who discovered carbon-14 dating? Who got the scientists way back when?
I don't remember.
Okay.
It was in the 50s. In the 1950s, but I can't remember the name of the person who came up with it. But it's pretty simple when you think about it. It's a pretty simple methodology. Now, I have to tell you, carbon-14 dating is it can only be done on things that were alive, so it's very limited. And for the most part, by the way, when you do archaeology, you don't find things that were alive. For the most part, people don't like dead bodies in town, right? So they take them out, and you want to excavate in. So by and large, you don't find bones and stuff. Also, carbon-14 dating, fairly large margin for error, larger than pottery, and carbon-14 dates, typically if you want to get a good one, you want to get multiple samples and you want to send them to multiple labs, right? So you're isolating your variables that way. So each single carbon-14 date's about $300. So you got about $1,000 to get one decent date, okay? If your potteries, and remember, you're doing hundreds of pottery dates every day. And your pottery dates are more accurate than your carbon-14 dates. Why would you do carbon-14? Now in Hawaii you do carbon-14 because a lot of the stuff is more recent and they didn't have pottery. So if it's more recent, your margin for error is less, you're more accurate. So Hawaii, plus Hawaii, they tend to have more money. But in general, carbon-14 we don't use very much. Now there are two cases where I was involved where we did use actually three. Three that, one is Stonehenge in England. You know Stonehenge in England, the big rocks sticking up? Those holes originally were dug with deer antlers. So that's something that was alive. So you have chips of deer antler down in the bottom of the holes, right? So they could carbon-14 date the deer antlers. That's the best they've got to go on. The date came back about 3,500 BC. So the first, at least Stonehenge 1, the first version of Stonehenge, that's the best date we have for it. So that's, but again, pretty good margin for error there, right? Maybe 300-400 year margin for error, but still, you know, that's the best we got. Another was a landslide. One of the things we were doing at Bethsaida was trying to figure out, there were some major floods that took place on the Jordan River, and there were some landslides that came down a cliff and appeared to go down and dam temporarily the river. And then, of course, then the dam would fill up and eventually burst, and that would cause a flood. So if we could, how do you date a landslide? Well, the way the geology team did is it buried a Syrian hare, this animal that actually related to an elephant, the hyrax. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it kind of looks like a rabbit. So it buried it in the landslide. We can carbon-14 date the rabbit and date the landslide. Right? So that worked. Another one I'll show you in a couple minutes. We found some dead bodies and we had a major question and we dated it by carbon-14. So carbon-14 is useful, but only under particular circumstances. And by and large, pottery dating, at least in the period we're dealing with, biblical archaeology, pottery dating is going to be better. And best of all is coins. Coins are great for dating something because they typically have dates on them. Look at that. Now, generally speaking, of course, you're excavating other people's trash. What's the probability of finding a coin? If you drop a coin, unlike a piece of pottery, you're going to hunt and try to find your coin, aren't you? So the result is you don't find coins very often. If in any given day, each individual excavator is coming up with half a bucket full of pottery pieces, in any given week, 50 excavators will come up with one coin. Okay, so you don't find them all that often. That's why I showed you my picture of my clean friend with the coin, right? He was very happy because he found a coin. Now, coins only began to be minted about 700 BC. So you're not going to get coins helping you out before 700 BC. So pretty much most of this, when you deal with the Old Testament, sorry, no coins for you. But later on, you'll get to be involved with coins, and then it'll at least have an emperor's name or something, give you a fairly narrow range of dates. And of course, then you have coins in a stratum with pottery that helps date the pottery, and you have a stratum with bones that helps date the bones and calibrate the carbon-14 dating. And so all these things kind of work together. So this is how you end up with absolute dates for something. So in the period that we're talking about, the period now of the United and the Divided Kingdom, when we talk about a particular date in terms of archaeology, we're talking about, let's say, give or take 100, 150 years. Okay? In that neighborhood, this combination, well, not coins, but the other things that people have been able to check will get you within that range, and that's helpful. That's real helpful. And sometimes we can even narrow the range because of cross-checking with other kinds of evidence. Okay, so I told you about carbon-14 dating. Here's some stuff that I was involved with excavating. I was involved with a filming of a Nova. You know Nova, the television show? Yes. So I did a Nova special excavation in a cave down by Masada in southern Israel by the Dead Sea. And while we were excavating in the cave, we found a number of interesting things. One here is a basket. So they had baskets to carry things. Baskets are made out of plant material, and plant material you can carbon-14 date. Here, apparently in this cave, they were rebels against the Roman Empire, they kept goats. And so you have ancient goat poop. So that's what he's doing. He's collecting ancient goat poop, and we carbon-14 dated ancient goat poop. You can do that. And of course, the inhabitants of the cave, we found them. Now this is really interesting. This is how we found them. They're skulls in a basket, and their bodies buried separately. Now this is weird because this cave was good evidence that this cave was inhabited by Jews who were rebelling against the Roman Empire. Are these guys the rebels who fought against the Romans? Did the Romans starve them out, which we think probably happened, or in this case probably thirsted them out because there wasn't any water? But the thing is, Jews don't do that. They don't bury skulls and bodies separately. That's really weird. In fact, among us, the archaeology team, we could only come up with one group of people who tended to do that. That was Chalcolithic people from about 4000 BC. So now we have a very interesting carbon-14 dating question. When did those skulls date from? Is it A, Chalcolithic, people who buried like that, 4000 BC, or B, Jewish rebels against the Roman Empire, 2nd century AD, right? We've got over a 4,000 year gap. Carbon-14 can answer that question. We dated the skulls. They dated the 2nd century AD. This was the Jewish rebels. They just buried them strangely, and we don't know why. Okay, but it was definitely not Chalcolithic. Okay, is this? Yeah. So let's talk now about the relationship between archaeology and written sources. It's one of the reasons I started doing archaeology, because I was concerned about this question. You will hear people say two silly things. Don't believe them. They will say, archaeology proves the Bible false. Or they will say, archaeology proves the Bible true. It does neither. Okay? And by the way, anybody who uses the word prove in the context of history clearly doesn't know what they're talking about. Okay? So historians don't prove anything. What they do is look at those puzzles with all the pieces missing, right? Pretty hard to talk about proving anything with that many pieces missing. So if archaeology doesn't prove the Bible false, and if archaeology doesn't prove the Bible true, why bother? Well, actually, that's where the fun comes in. Because what archaeology and the Bible, the best language I can use for it is two words. One is, very often, and by the way, we're not just talking about the Bible, we're talking about archaeology relative to any written sources from the period. We could be talking just as well about Troy and the writings of Homer about the Trojan War, for example. Same thing holds. And that is simply that at some points, when you actually have archaeological evidence about something and the text is clearly talking about the same thing, you have a checkpoint, right? You can check the written source over against the archaeological evidence. And when you can do that, overwhelmingly, the archaeology corroborates written sources, okay? That's an important word, corroborate. What it means is that particular detail, say, for example, Ahab had a palace at Jezebel, Ahab and Jezebel had a palace at Jezreel. The Bible says that. Archaeologists went to Jezreel, they were able to identify the site, and they dug it up and they found a palace there. Okay? So what does that mean? It means that archaeology and the text corroborate one another. They agree. On that one point, they agree. Over and over again, what we found with archaeology is things that people thought were fictional in a text. Not unusually, we have actually found them on the ground, and they corroborated. They found out, oh, that we thought that was fictional, and it really wasn't. The archaeology corroborates in that particular point. They agree. Also, of course, archaeology helps us read the texts more intelligently. The text helps us read the archaeology more intelligently. If we didn't have a text that told us about the king of the northern kingdom, Ahab, building a palace at Jezreel, we'd still find something at Jezreel. We just wouldn't know what to call it, and we wouldn't know who it was associated with or whatever. We just know we had a big, fancy place there. So the biblical text helps us identify the place, and sometimes helps us know where to hunt. Right? Sometimes you find something in the Bible and you say, where was that? I wonder if that's there. You start asking these questions, and that often drives people to go dig someplace and check it out. So, another word that I would use is illuminate. Illuminate. You know what illuminate means? To shed light on something, to shine a light on something. Archaeology and biblical text or other texts, they shine light on each other, right? The text shines light on the archaeology and helps you be enlightened, right? Helps you understand it better. And archaeology shines light on the text and helps you understand it better. Now, sometimes what this means is your favorite interpretations of the text have to go because they don't fit with what you found on the ground. That's your interpretation of the text. It's not the text. It may also mean that what you thought you would find in archaeology, you don't find, and you get bothered by something missing, but a very important rule, absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. Absence of evidence is not the same as evidence of absence. That is, if you say, wait, there's supposed to be a bunch of Hebrews around, and you don't find any evidence of Hebrews around, that doesn't mean Hebrews weren't around. What does it mean? It means you haven't found them yet. Now, about 10% of what can be excavated in Israel has been excavated. We got 90% to go. Okay, so there's a whole lot more yet to be found. So until everything has been excavated that can be excavated, and everything's been double and triple checked in ways that archaeologists can do, and remember that's hard because archaeology is a destructive discipline. You're always taking apart the evidence. This is always going to be a challenge. But absence of evidence does not constitute evidence of absence. That is very important. Which means it is virtually impossible for archaeology ever to prove a text wrong. Archaeology cannot disprove a written text. It's just not possible unless there's only one logical way it can, where a text says nobody ever lived there. And you know precisely where there is for sure, and you excavate there, which of course you wouldn't do because you assume nobody ever lived, and you actually find somebody lived there. Right? That would be archaeology contradicting a written text. But that virtually never happened. Why would you ever say such a thing in a written text? So for that reason, archaeology can virtually never contradict a text. What it can do is corroborate and illuminate. That make sense? All right. So when we put all this together, I think something is important to keep in mind, and this is my perspective. I take very seriously John 8:32 when Jesus said the truth will set you free. It seems to me that our job as interpreters of the Bible, and my job as a historian and as an archaeologist, is to seek the truth. And when I find the truth, it is God's truth, and truth will shine light on truth. We don't need to take, as sometimes people do, a sort of cowering or defensive stance or whatever. It is our job, I think, to seek the truth wherever we can seek it, and to try to understand it and make the best sense out of it we possibly can, on the assumption that God is a God of truth, and we can trust Him. We don't have to be. We never have to be afraid of the truth. We never have to be afraid of the truth. The truth will set you free. And I think that's important as we look at all these different things, because it can help us. The more help we get from archaeology and from Assyrian sources and whatever on understanding the period, the better we're going to understand the Bible, and the better we're going to be able to do that task that you set yourselves to do, and that is understand the intent of the original author with respect to the original audience in the original time, right? And try to get yourself into that world. To me, at least, that understanding of truth in many dimensions is very helpful for understanding the truth that is in the Bible. Does that make sense? Okay. So, we're done with archaeology. Well, no, we're not done with archaeology. We're introduced to archaeology now. Now what I'd like to do is let you experience a little archaeology. So, you can be the staging area here. All right, so this is, don't do this at home. This is ancient pottery from Israel. And let me do, well, I'll teach you a little pottery reading. So first of all, you're not supposed to take pottery out of Israel. This is okay, because this has already been discovered, analyzed, recorded, and discarded. Okay, well, so we at Bethsaida, after we do our pottery reading, all the pieces that we're not saving, we throw them on the ground underneath the tables where we have breakfast. It's sort of our pavement. Okay, so this is just, so you can, so long as it's been analyzed, then nobody's going to ever learn anything from it again. So there we have it. So let's learn a little bit about pottery reading. So here's an interesting, so what you have to do first of all is find what archaeologists call a diagnostic piece. A diagnostic piece is usually the rim. Anybody ever thrown pottery on a wheel? Okay, so think about it. When you do pot, now you can do pottery by hand. You can coil build, you can build a pot by hand without a wheel. But they kind of look, well, at least the ones I make are kind of look like a grocery bag. But you can do coils and stuff. But most pottery, at least in the period we're dealing with, was thrown on a wheel. Okay, so that tells you certain things. Pots are always round, right? Because of the nature of a wheel, it's always round, and they're level, right? All you do is put your finger on the top and touch it, and it's level. Okay? So pots are level, pots are round. And then pots are, they're made out of clay. The clay has to come from a particular place. And of course, you can analyze the clay and that sort of thing. And then pots are fired. So when you start to analyze pottery, the first thing you want to do is take something like something flat. Here we go. Something flat. This isn't quite flat, but you can get the idea. Okay, if this is level, you have to have the rim piece, the top piece, because that's level. Okay, if you have any other piece, it's not level, but the rim is level. And you have to say it like in Israeli, you have to say rim. Here's the rim. So take the rim, and then you put it up against your your straight edge, and you tilt it so that you don't see any light come through. That means you've got it level. That is the attitude that the pot was on the wheel. Okay? So now, there are two different types of pots, basically. There are open vessels and closed vessels. Okay? So open, they kind of go like bowl shape, right? They're kind of open. Closed, they kind of go whoop-de-doo. Okay? So, what you are doing, you're looking at the rim, and you're looking at it now in a cross section, and you're looking at it sitting in its original attitude. Okay, the angle that it was thrown. Okay, now look at it carefully. Is this open or closed? All right, follow with your eyes. This is the top, and it's going to go down like this. You're going to follow the pot, and you're going to trace it down. Can you see that? Okay. So what kind of shape is this? This is like a big bowl, right? If you trace it down, it'll go like this. Can you see it? Okay, now you take the top view and you look at the rim and you know it's round. So you got to now use your imagination and fill in the gaps. So look at the top and look how it curves, and then imagine it keeping on curving all the way around. Can you see the curve? There's not very much. Okay, and you got to put the curve together with the attitude that you saw before. All right, how big around is this thing on the top? Show me. Big, right? This is big around. Big, you can follow it around, right? Okay, so if you put that together with this, what do you get? Big old punch bowl, right? That's what it is. This is a punch bowl. This is for a wedding reception. No, it's not. It kind of is. This is what we call a crater. A crater is a big bowl for people to drink out of, and you mix water and wine. Typically 8 or 10 to 1 water and wine, and this would be a standard crater. Now, a couple other things you can tell me when you look at this. You can look at the cross section where it's broken, and you can right away tell me, this is a crappy potter. See? This is a crappy, why? If you know anything about throwing pots, good potters can throw pots with thin walls. Thick walls are people like me who throw pots really badly. Okay? So this is really thick pottery. This thing weighed 100 pounds, probably. This is very heavy, just this little piece. Imagine how big that thing, but being that thick. And if you look carefully, inside with a broken area, you can see what they call grog, little pieces of rock that are inside, which give stability to the clay. Different kinds of clays have different kinds of grogs. And you can also see the firing. If the firing was really good, it's even color all the way through. If it's not very good, it's different color on the outside and different color in the middle. Then you look at the cross section of the rim itself, and you can see that this has a flange, right? This triangular looking thing. See, it looks like a triangle there, and of course that would be so you can pick it up. You can put your fingers under here and pick it up. See the triangle? Okay. This triangle and that shape, you already saw from the example I gave you of the cooking pot that flange means something, right? And those flanges change over time. This thing is not going to have any handles. This is not a cooking pot. And so you get this particularly big flange. Another thing you can tell me is you look inside. See that shiny stuff inside? Shiny brown stuff? That's glaze. when you put all those pieces of knowledge together, oh, by the way, you can also, if you wish, do analysis of the clay itself and figure out where the clay came from. And some geologists have done that, and they take samples of clay in different streams or whatever, and they compare it, and so you can see trade patterns. Where's the pottery being made, and how far is it being distributed? Typically, most pottery only travels about 20, 30 miles from where it was made. After that, it gets broken. But it depends, sometimes it's in shipping, so we get lots of wine jars from the island of Rhodes in Greece, for example. Well, that's, fine imported wine. By the way, that's really good pottery, too. It's really strong stuff that's hard to break. I can tell you very quickly how to date this one. Glaze was invented by Muslims. So this has glaze, so this is a Muslim piece. So this has to be after the Muslims took over the area, and Muhammad died in 632 AD. So it has to be after 632 AD, probably in the 700s, something like that. Okay? So there's a piece of a crater. Here's another... where are you? Uh-oh. Uh-oh, I'm missing a piece.
Ellie?
Oh, well. No, oh, here it is. Oh, good, okay. So here's another piece. So right away, let's look at the top. Okay, look at the curvature. Smaller, huh? How much smaller? Quite a bit? How big around was this, do you think? Yeah, you get the idea. Something like that. Okay. The attitude is this. Okay, that's the attitude. So is this open or closed? This is closed. So this would be something that goes like, it would be about this big around at the top, something like that, and it would be like this. Okay? And so this is basically straight up and down. Then if you look at the rim, you see instead of that triangular cross section, you see this kind of bulb, kind of a bead around the outside. Pretty small, not big enough. You're probably not going to pick it up by this, are you? That's because this has handles. We call this an amphora or a jug. If it has one handle, it's a jug. If it's two handles, it's an amphora. Kind of on the shoulders where it kind of comes in like this, right there is where you would have the handles. Okay? And this is much thinner. You see, better potter. Still, this is pretty crummy pottery, and no glaze. Okay? And this is a Roman piece, probably late Roman, 2nd century, something like that. So this would be a jug or a jar. Now here's a body piece, so it's not a rim, so we can't do the attitude. What we can do though is the curvature, can't we? So, see the curvature? So how big around is this one? Maybe slightly bigger than the last one. Okay? And this is a body piece. It's vertical, it doesn't curve at all. So it's kind of a straight-sided piece of the body going around. And right away, when you look at this one at all carefully, we'll pass it around, but you can see there's lots of grog. And you can also see the color in the middle is not the same as the color on the outside. See that? The color, in other words, this is poorly fired. And it's really crappy clay. Lots of rock and grit in it. This is cheapo. Now, this is an amphora also, but this is a big storage vessel that you'd put grain in or something like that. It would probably sit in a wooden rack. And we find these all the time. These date from the time of King David, about 1000 BC. It's a cheapo storage vessel from the time of King David. Or in this case, his wife, right? This is where his wife lived, Ma'akah. This is kind of cool. This is a napkin ring. Actually, I have some of these. My wife used them for a napkin ring once. This is the handle of an amphora. Okay, so kind of like that last one, although much thinner walls. You can see. This would be one of those where you hold like this. I found this snorkeling on the coast of Caesarea. So this is for shipping, right? This fell off a boat, and it's a crummy piece of pottery. It's not very well made. This is just for shipping. You put them in these storage vessels in wooden racks with holes in them in the ship hold, anchored onto the sides of the ship so they would be able to transport. And if you look carefully, and you see inside this handle, you can see some ridges. See those ridges that look like somebody took a pencil or something and stuck it into the clay as it was spinning? See those little ridges inside there? Okay, that ridge style, that's fancy. The ridge style is only made during two periods of time. Hellenistic period, about 100 years before Jesus, or the Byzantine period, about 300 years after Jesus. So which one is this? Well, this particular port didn't exist as a port before Jesus. So this is post-Jesus period. This is a Byzantine, 300 AD roughly, transport vessel for a ship. Doubling as a napkin ring. Now this one's cool. All right, this is a crummy piece of pottery, just a body piece. You can see the curvature again. Another storage vessel of some sort. Maybe see it better that way. Okay. Now, if you look on the surface, you won't, only a few people in the front are going to be able to see this until you pass it around. You can see on the front there's what look like scratches. It looks like somebody took a comb and just over the wet clay raked a comb. Can you see that? And it's not even. It's not like they put it on the wheel. They just scratched it around. Okay, we call this. Are you ready? Combed ware. We have fancy names in archaeology for these things. But combed ware is a diagnostic piece of pottery. It is very important. This piece of pottery dates to the dawn of human civilization. This is some of the oldest pottery in the world, dating to about 3500 BC. So, early bronze combed ware. Now, I also have in my little bag of tricks, I have some ancient Roman coins. Okay, so you can now they're cheap because that's all I could afford. But you can see some of the pictures and inscriptions on them, and they're in abbreviated Latin, so you can't read them. But anyhow, these are ancient Roman coins from Israel, and so you can pass those around.
What period are those coins from?
Those coins are mainly second to 4th century AD. All right, so go ahead and pass these around. So there's a bunch of other pieces in there you can see. And this one I'm not going to pass around. Okay, this is an ancient oil lamp. Oil lamp. This is an oil lamp. So you put the oil in here, and you put the wick in there, and it fits very nicely in your hand, and you won't get burned. Okay? See that? So this is an ancient oil lamp. So this is if you want to see at night at your home, if you want to read a book at night or whatever, pull out your papyrus scroll and read some Aramaic for fun. This is what you're going to be lit by. Okay? It's basically a sort of a durable candle. Okay? This is an oil lamp. Now, notice, please, the snout of this oil lamp. You can only make that by using a kind of a knife and cutting the clay. It looks kind of like a pig snout. See that? That's unique. These are only made in Israel. In fact, only made around Jerusalem, and only made for about 30 years. We call this a Herodian oil lamp because it was only made during the time of the sons of Herod the Great. So we call it a Herodian oil lamp. This is a diagnostic piece of pottery. By the way, this particular oil lamp, not this one, but the same style of oil lamp, was found in a boat that was buried in the mud of the Sea of Galilee, and inside it was a coin. Now that's dating for you, right? You can date the pot with the coin, and you can date the boat with the whole thing, and that's very cool. But these were only made for about 30 years, so this is really nice. When you find a Herodian oil lamp, it so happens that these were only made almost precisely during the years Jesus was alive. Right? So this is basically Jesus' date. You find one of these, you say Jesus was here, right? At least his period, and it's only in his area and only during his lifetime. So a Herodian oil lamp is a really cool find when you find it, and there are quite a few of them around. We have pretty good evidence from that period. So they've been checked and cross-checked over and over again. And so here is a Herodian oil lamp that Jesus used at the Last Supper. If you pay me $1 American, I tell you more.
How much do they sell for?
I bought this on the legal antiquities market. I think it was about $100. Something like that. I mean, it's been broken several times. It's a crappy one. But hey, it's cool. You never saw one before.
Yeah.
$1 American. So I will not pass this around. I will leave it in the, you can come up and see it. You can touch it if you want, but don't like knock it on the ground or something. That actually happened once. But it's been broken enough times to just glue it back together. Okay, so it is here. All right, enough of this. Enough of this. Okay, so you can play with pottery. Go, oh, Mark has more.
What? This was found at El Hazor. It's a
Another napkin ring.
It's shown, you know, the pot, and I was told that it's anywhere from 1800 BC to 800 BC. So between 2400 to 3000 years old. But yeah, Hazor was in Joshua chapter 11, verses 10 and 11. It says that Joshua and the Israelites slaughtered the entire city and burned it to the ground. So this was a piece that was found there, and I'm hoping that it was a discard pile that it was taken from.
I'm hoping so too. Well, you had the guide who handed it to you, right? So
Yeah.
she probably knows what she's doing. I hope.
See on the inside, it's got like that black color, like Mark was saying. It's a different color than the outside, and so probably not fired real well.
Cool. So yeah. So that's a and Hazor, by the way, is a very. We're going to be talking about it here shortly. It's a very important archaeological site for our purposes. So we'll be going back there, so you can work with Mark's pot. My stuff was all from Bethsaida, which is not far from Hazor. It's kind of in the same neighborhood. Okay. Let's see. How are we going to work the time here? Why don't you take like, no, we normally get through 10:15 to 10:30, you said, for break?
However you want to do it, we can either do a 15-minute break between 10:15 and 10:30, or sometimes we can do a 10-minute and then a 5-minute later. However you like.
I tell you what, I'll start and we'll take a break at 10:15 to 10:30. Okay, we'll just figure it out. We'll do it on the fly. My daughter's favorite way to do things. Okay, so now let's do some archaeology, shall we?
Question, Mark?
Yeah,
Can I take pictures of these or no?
of course. No photobombing though. Unless it's me. You don't want me photobombing. It might ruin your camera. Okay, so let's now talk about one particular archaeological problem. Here I'm going to take you out to the cutting edge a little bit and give you a bit of a headache. But I thought it would be helpful for you to see this is the kind of stuff that archaeologists grapple with all the time, and it happens to be right smack in our period. So I think it's helpful, and it'll also give you opportunity to see some very important archaeological evidence. So those dates that I gave you for all these kings and so on, that's based upon primarily the literary evidence. A little bit of archaeology is thrown into the mix. But now we want to look at it from the archaeological point of view. And the big question is, what do we know about the 10th century BC? Now remember, we're BCs, so 10th century is 900s BC. Okay, so we're going to deal with the problem of the 10th century. So notice in AD we're in the 2000s, so that's the 21st century. And when you go BC, you do it the opposite way. So 900s is the 10th century BC. All right, now, here is your basic big picture chronology of the Hebrews in the land, okay? First of all, of course, you have the Exodus. They come into the land, and remember I told you there's a debate, 1450 or 1250. Once they come in, you have the period of conquest and Judges, right? Joshua and Judges kind of period. And then we have the united monarchy, starting about 1030 with Saul. So we have Saul, David, Solomon. United monarchy. Here's Saul, David, Solomon. A nice round number. If you like me, you like round numbers. David, 1,000. Right? David, 1,000. That gives you kind of gives you a centerpiece there. David, 1,000. And by the way, that's really quite solid time-wise as far as our chronology is concerned. Then we have the divided monarchy beginning at the death of Solomon, 931 or so. There's a bit of a debate on that date, but 931.